September 1847. Smoke drifted across the rooftops of Mexico City. The sound of battle was fading. American soldiers marched through the streets of a foreign capital while their flag rose above one of the largest cities in the Americas. For the first time in its history, the United States had conquered the capital of a neighboring nation. The victory shocked the world. Just a few years earlier, the United States and Mexico had been uneasy neighbors sharing a vast frontier. Now one army occupied the other's capital. The war would last less than 2 years. Yet its consequences would shape North America for generations. Entire states would change hands. Political battles over slavery would intensify. Future Civil War generals would learn their trade on Mexican battlefields. And historians would spend the next century debating whether this conflict was the fulfillment of a national dream or an act of expansion at the expense of a weaker neighbor. So how did two neighboring countries end up at war? Why did American soldiers march all the way to Mexico City? And how did one conflict redraw the map of an entire continent? This is the story of the Mexican-American War. Into this growing crisis stepped President James K. Polk. Polk was a firm believer in manifest destiny. This popular American idea held that the United States was destined to expand across the continent from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. To supporters, expansion represented progress, opportunity, and national growth. To critics, it often meant conflict and conquest. Polk had ambitious goals. He wanted California. He wanted New Mexico. And he wanted American control of the Pacific coast. His administration attempted diplomacy first. American representatives offered to purchase California and settle border disputes. Mexico refused. Political instability inside Mexico made negotiations even more difficult. As talks collapsed, tensions increased. In early 1846, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor and American troops into the disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. To the United States, these troops were defending American land. To Mexico, they were invading Mexican territory. Neither side was willing to back down. Then came the incident Polk had been waiting for. On April 25, 1846, Mexican cavalry attacked an American patrol commanded by Captain Seth Thornton. Several American soldiers were killed or captured. The clash occurred inside the disputed zone. But Polk immediately seized the opportunity. He informed Congress that American blood had been shed upon American soil. The statement electrified public opinion. Calls for war spread across the country. Although some politicians questioned Polk's claims, Congress overwhelmingly approved military action. The United States and Mexico were now at war. Neither nation fully understood what lay ahead. What began as a border dispute was about to become one of the most consequential conflicts in North American history. The first shots had been fired. But neither side yet understood how far the conflict would go. Soon American armies would cross into Mexico itself. To understand why the United States invaded Mexico, the story must begin decades before the first shots were fired. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain after a long and difficult struggle. The new nation inherited enormous territories stretching from Central America to the Pacific coast and far into what is now the American Southwest. Among those territories was Texas. At the time, Texas was sparsely populated and difficult for the Mexican government to control. Hoping to strengthen the region, Mexican authorities encouraged settlers to move there. Many arrived from the United States. Over time, the number of American settlers grew rapidly. These newcomers brought their own language, customs, and political ideas. As the population increased, tensions between the settlers and the Mexican government began to rise. Disputes emerged over laws, taxation, immigration, and slavery. The situation eventually exploded into rebellion. In 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. The conflict produced some of the most famous events in American history, including the Battle of the Alamo and the Battle of San Jacinto. After defeating Mexican forces, the Republic of Texas emerged as an independent nation. But Mexico never accepted the loss. From Mexico's perspective, Texas remained a rebellious province that had broken away illegally. For nearly a decade, Texas existed as an independent republic. Then came a decision that changed everything. In 1845, the United States formally annexed Texas. Many Americans celebrated the move. Many Mexicans viewed it as a direct challenge to their sovereignty. The dispute became even more dangerous because the two countries disagreed on where Texas actually ended. Mexico claimed the border was the Nueces River. The United States insisted the border was much farther south at the Rio Grande. Between those rivers lay disputed territory claimed by both nations. When war was declared in May 1846, many Americans believed the conflict would be short. Many Mexican leaders believed the same. Both sides were wrong. The war quickly expanded beyond the disputed borderlands and became a struggle that stretched across thousands of miles. The first major campaign unfolded in northern Mexico under General Zachary Taylor. A career officer known for his calm demeanor and practical leadership, Taylor commanded a relatively small force stationed near the Rio Grande. Before Congress had even formally declared war, Mexican and American troops had already clashed. The first major battle came at Palo Alto in May 1846. On an open plain near the border, American artillery proved devastating. The mobility and accuracy of U.S. guns repeatedly shattered Mexican attacks. The following day, the two armies fought again at Resaca de la Palma. This time, American forces pushed Mexican troops from the battlefield and secured control of the disputed region. News of the victories spread rapidly across the United States. For many Americans, the war seemed to confirm the belief that their nation was destined to expand. But these early successes were only the beginning. Taylor continued advancing southward into Mexican territory. His next objective was Monterrey, one of northern Mexico's most important cities. In September 1846, American troops entered a brutal urban battle unlike anything many of them had experienced before. Mexican defenders fought street by street and house by house. Snipers fired from rooftops. Barricades blocked roads. Every building became a fortress. After days of intense combat, Mexican forces withdrew and Monterrey fell. The victory strengthened Taylor's reputation and turned him into a national hero. Yet the Mexican government was not prepared to surrender. At this critical moment, one of the most controversial figures in Mexican history returned to power. Antonio López de Santa Anna. The same general who had fought at the Alamo a decade earlier had been living in exile. Now he returned to Mexico promising to defend the nation against the American invasion. Santa Anna quickly assembled a large army and marched north. His goal was simple: destroy Taylor's force and reverse the course of the war. The two armies met in February 1847 near Buena Vista. The battle became one of the war's most dramatic confrontations. Taylor commanded roughly 5,000 men. Santa Anna's army was significantly larger. For 2 days, fierce fighting raged across rugged terrain. Repeated Mexican attacks threatened to overwhelm American positions. At several moments, defeat seemed possible, but Taylor's troops held their ground. American artillery once again played a decisive role. By the end of the battle, Santa Anna withdrew. Taylor had survived one of the greatest tests of the war. His victory made him a national celebrity and eventually helped carry him to the White House. While Taylor fought in northern Mexico, other American forces were advancing elsewhere. In the West, General Stephen Kearny led troops into New Mexico. The territory fell with little resistance. American control spread rapidly across the region. Farther west, events in California unfolded with remarkable speed. American settlers launched what became known as the Bear Flag Revolt. Declaring independence from Mexican authority, they established a short-lived republic. Soon afterward, U.S. military and naval forces arrived. California gradually came under American control. By early 1847, the United States had achieved victories across a vast area stretching from the Rio Grande to the Pacific Ocean. The war was no longer simply about Texas. American armies now occupied large portions of Mexican territory. Cities had fallen. Armies had been defeated. Entire provinces were slipping from Mexico's control. Yet despite these setbacks, Mexico refused to negotiate on American terms. Many Mexican leaders believed continued resistance was the only honorable option. Others hoped distance, terrain, and time would eventually wear down the invaders. For President Polk, the situation was becoming frustrating. Military victories had not produced peace. Capturing border regions was not enough. If Mexico would not surrender after losing territory in the north and west, something more dramatic would be required. The United States would have to strike at the heart of the Mexican nation itself. Despite defeats, Mexico refused to surrender. To force peace, the United States would attempt something even more ambitious: an attack directly against the Mexican capital. By early 1847, the United States had won victories across northern Mexico and the American West. Yet the war remained unfinished. Mexico's government had not surrendered. Its armies continued to fight, and President James K. Polk knew that occupying distant provinces alone would not force a peace settlement. If the United States wanted a decisive victory, it would have to do something far more ambitious. It would have to march on Mexico City. The task fell to General Winfield Scott. Known for his discipline, intelligence, and careful planning, Scott was one of the most experienced officers in the American Army. His strategy was bold. Rather than advancing hundreds of miles across difficult northern deserts, he would launch an amphibious invasion from the Gulf Coast and drive directly toward the Mexican capital. It was one of the most daring military operations ever attempted by the United States up to that point. In March 1847, American warships appeared off the coast near Veracruz. Thousands of soldiers prepared to land. The operation would become the largest amphibious assault in American history up to that time. Under the protection of naval guns, American troops came ashore with remarkable efficiency. The landing surprised many observers. There was little confusion, little panic. Within hours, a powerful invasion force stood on Mexican soil. The city of Veracruz soon found itself under siege. American artillery bombarded defensive positions while naval forces tightened the blockade. For days, shells crashed into the city. Buildings were damaged. Civilians sought shelter. Eventually, Mexican commanders concluded that continued resistance was hopeless. Veracruz surrendered. The gateway to the interior of Mexico was now open. Scott wasted no time. His army began the difficult march inland. The route climbed from the hot coastal lowlands into rugged mountains and high plateaus. Disease, exhaustion, and supply problems constantly threatened the campaign. But the army kept moving. Soon, Scott faced one of the strongest defensive positions of the war. At Cerro Gordo, Mexican forces under Santa Anna occupied high ground overlooking a narrow mountain road. The position appeared formidable. A direct assault promised heavy casualties. Instead, American engineers and scouts discovered a hidden route around the Mexican flank. Among the officers involved was a young captain named Robert E. Lee. The maneuver succeeded. American troops struck from unexpected directions and shattered the Mexican defenses. Santa Anna escaped, but another major obstacle had fallen. The road to Mexico City remained open. As Scott advanced deeper into Mexico, his army entered increasingly dangerous territory. The farther the Americans marched from the coast, the longer and more vulnerable their supply lines became. Mexican resistance continued. Guerrilla attacks harassed convoys. Roads became dangerous. Every mile forward carried new risks. Yet the advance never stopped. During the summer of 1847, Scott's army approached the Valley of Mexico. The decisive campaign was about to begin. At Contreras and Churubusco, fierce battles erupted on the approaches to the capital. Mexican soldiers fought stubbornly. Defensive positions were contested with determination. But American forces continued to push forward. The defeats brought Scott ever closer to the city itself. Negotiations briefly offered hope for peace. But the talks collapsed. The fighting resumed. In September, another bloody battle took place at Molino del Rey. Both sides suffered significant losses. The struggle demonstrated that even after months of setbacks, Mexico remained willing to resist. Then came the final obstacle: Chapultepec. The fortress stood atop a hill overlooking Mexico City. Its thick walls and commanding position made it one of the capital's strongest defenses. Among the defenders were young military cadets whose courage would later become legendary in Mexican history. American artillery opened fire. The bombardment continued for hours. Then the assault began. Soldiers climbed steep slopes under enemy fire. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. Eventually, American forces broke through. The fortress fell. With Chapultepec lost, the defenses of Mexico City began to collapse. On September 14, 1847, American troops entered the Mexican capital. The war had reached its dramatic climax. The flag of the United States flew over the National Palace. Thousands of American soldiers occupied the heart of Mexico. For many observers around the world, the sight was astonishing. A young republic had defeated a neighboring nation and captured its capital. Yet beneath the victory lay another story. Among Scott's officers were men whose names would later become famous. Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, George McClellan, Stonewall Jackson. The lessons they learned in Mexico would shape the American Civil War less than 2 decades later. The military war was effectively over, but the political battle over the future of North America was only beginning. When American troops entered Mexico City in September 1847, the military outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. Mexico's capital was occupied. Its armies had suffered repeated defeats. Much of its northern territory was already under American control. Yet victory on the battlefield did not automatically bring peace. The hardest questions still remained unanswered. How would the war end? What territory would change hands? And what would the future of North America look like after the guns fell silent? Inside Mexico, the situation was chaotic. Governments rose and fell. Political leaders argued over whether negotiations should continue. Many Mexicans wanted to keep fighting despite the occupation. Others believed further resistance would only bring more destruction. Meanwhile, President James K. Polk faced his own challenges. The war had been successful militarily, but it was becoming increasingly controversial at home. Critics accused the administration of provoking the conflict. Some argued the war had been fought not for defense, but for expansion. Others feared that every new territory acquired from Mexico would reopen the explosive debate over slavery. Despite these disagreements, negotiations slowly moved forward. After months of discussion, representatives from both nations reached an agreement. On February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. The treaty formally ended the Mexican-American War. Its terms would permanently reshape the continent. Under the agreement, Mexico recognized the Rio Grande as the official border of Texas. More importantly, Mexico ceded an enormous amount of territory to the United States. The transfer became known as the Mexican Cession. The land included present-day California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona and New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The acquisition added hundreds of thousands of square miles to the United States. In return, the United States agreed to pay Mexico $15 million and assumed certain financial claims owed to American citizens. On paper, the payment appeared substantial, but the scale of the territorial transfer was extraordinary. Mexico lost roughly half of the territory it had controlled at independence. For many Mexicans, the treaty became one of the most painful moments in the nation's history. The loss was not simply geographic. It was emotional, political, and deeply personal. Entire communities suddenly found themselves living inside a different country without ever moving from their homes. Families, businesses, and local governments faced an uncertain future. The memory of the defeat would remain powerful in Mexico for generations. In the United States, celebrations erupted. Supporters of Manifest Destiny viewed the treaty as the fulfillment of a national mission. The nation now stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. A dream that many expansionists had imagined for decades had become reality. Yet not everyone celebrated. The war had exposed deep political divisions. Among its critics was a young congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln questioned President Polk's justification for the conflict and challenged claims about where the first bloodshed had occurred. Others worried about what would happen next. Would slavery expand into the newly acquired territories? Would new states enter the Union as free states or slave states? These questions would soon dominate American politics. The debates unleashed by the Mexican-American War helped accelerate tensions that eventually led to the Civil War. Ironically, many of the future commanders of that conflict had served together in Mexico. Ulysses S. Grant later described the Mexican-American War as one of the most unjust wars ever waged by a stronger nation against a weaker one. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, George McClellan, and many others gained valuable experience during the campaign. The battlefields of Mexico became a training ground for the conflict that would later divide the United States itself. The legacy of the war continues to be debated even today. For some Americans, it represented the successful expansion of a growing nation. For many Mexicans, it symbolized foreign aggression and national tragedy. Both interpretations remain part of the historical conversation. What cannot be disputed is the scale of the consequences. In less than 2 years, the Mexican-American War transformed the map of North America. For the United States, it opened the road to the Pacific and accelerated the country's rise as a continental power. For Mexico, it marked one of the most difficult chapters in its national story. The border created by the war still exists today. The territories transferred in 1848 became home to millions of people and some of the most important cities in North America. And the questions raised by the conflict have never completely disappeared. Was the war the fulfillment of manifest destiny? Or was it the conquest of a weaker neighbor by a stronger one? History has never produced a single answer. But perhaps the most remarkable fact is this. A war that lasted less than 2 years changed the destiny of 2 nations forever. And if you look at a modern map of North America, you are still seeing the consequences of that decision nearly 2 centuries later. The Mexican-American War did not simply change a border. It changed the future. It created new states, expanded a nation from ocean to ocean, helped set the stage for the American Civil War, and left a legacy that still shapes relations between the United States and Mexico today. But this raises another fascinating question. If the Mexican-American War helped create the modern United States, what happened to the people living in those newly acquired territories after the border moved around them? That story is even more surprising, and we'll explore it in the next chapter of history. Thank you for watching History Ledger.